Hello, I'm on my way to Shrewsbury in the landlocked county of Shropshire, and I'm going to investigate one of the most important coaching inns of the 18th century. I shall also be climbing up this, the world's tallest Doric column. These slippery steps take me to the damp, dark hideout of a very slippery customer indeed. And we find out the secret behind Myddle Castle, or what's left of it. Why not join me for the ride? I'm Richard Vobes, and I'm the Bald Explorer. The Bald Explorer is of course about travelling around England and looking at its towns and villages, its myths and legends, and of course taking a peek at its unique architecture. So because it is about travel, this episode takes the look at the delights and pitfalls of taking a journey from a historical perspective. So in order to tell my story, I'm in the landlocked county of Shropshire on the border with Wales. We take travel for granted these days. We can hop into our cars, catch a train, or jump on a bus and be at our destination in a very short space of time. A quick glance at the map, a few button pushes on the sat-nav, and away we go. And if we break down, well, there's always our roadside assistant membership to get us moving again. Of course, it wasn't always like that. Travel was a big undertaking and not to be done lightly. Go back a couple of hundred years and it was a very different proposition. Apart from the fact that there were rascals and ruffians hiding in the undergrowth, ready to say, "Stand and deliver and hand over your valuables," the roads seemed to conspire against you. Wet and rutted in the winter, dry and dusty in the summer. There were plenty of obstacles to challenge you on your way. Just crossing a river could be problematic. Even today, we have the occasional ford. The early merchants, who had their pack horses weighed down with their wares, had to resort to wading across these wet encumbrances until suitable bridges had been constructed. This aided the commercial traveller no end. The medieval stonemasons were soon perfecting their skills and spanning bigger, faster rivers with no problems at all. This still left the roads in a state very much to be desired. Wheeled vehicles could barely make any headway on these godforsaken tracks. Thankfully, with the implementation of the Turnpike Act of the 17th century, roads started to be improved, funded now by the tolls along the way. This is the busy A5. The old London to Hollyhead route, a relatively fast road through England and Wales onto its connection with Ireland. Thanks to civil engineers like Thomas Telford, these old rutted highways were professionally surveyed, resurfaced and massively improved. So as a result of this, people no longer had to travel on foot or mule or horse. They could be conveyed from pillar to post in style. The coaching era had begun. The coaches made it possible to make extended journeys, if you had the money, across the width and breadth of Britain. But even coach travel wasn't as comfortable or as luxurious as you might imagine. Neither was it particularly fast. Inevitably, that meant stopping at hotels and inns along the route for refreshment and sustenance, or even a bed for the night. Fortunately, places like these were scattered along the way, where the coachmen could change their horses and the passengers could ease their jangled nerves. I'm heading up Wild Cop, which is a steep hill right near the centre of Shrewsbury in the county town of Shropshire. And at the top is the Lion Hotel, a very majestic hotel which has a fascinating but checkered history.
We've got records going back to about 1580, when it was then owned by the Mittens. It would have been quite a bustling hotel. Coaches coming and going and arriving at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning or leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning. It must have been a sort of Ivor activity in those days. Porters carrying luggage. There would be no central heating, so there would be fires in all the bedrooms, so you'd have porters taking wood to the bedrooms and lighting fires ready for guests to arrive. So I wouldn't probably like to have been here at that time, but it would have been nice to have been here for one day to see it.
Yes.
Often, these inns were run by entrepreneurial businesses throughout the age.
Robert Lawrence is one of the heroes of Shrewsbury. He turned Shrewsbury from a border town into a town that was at the centre of things. 1780, he took over the ownership of the Lion Hotel, which meant that he brought the Royal Mail and the stagecoaches through the Lion on the way through Wales and Anglesey across to Ireland. So he brought untold wealth and really put it on the map.
A few miles to the east from Shrewsbury, on the London to Hollyhead road, is this wonderful example of an old coaching bridge. It's bypassed now by a more modern bridge, but luckily the 20th century engineers didn't knock down its predecessor. It was built in 1774 and again crosses the River Severn. Luckily now, though, it's protected by Grade 2 listed status. But look at the width! I mean, it's just wide enough to get a coach and, say, 6 horses to go clambering across. So it's not that difficult to picture it in its heyday back in the 18th and 19th century as it perhaps once was.
In 1730, we have on record that it took 3 ladies, 5 gentlemen and 6 servants 12 days to travel from Shrewsbury to London in 1730. By 1820, that had been reduced to 16 hours. In 1730, the roads were very, very poor, lots and lots of potholes, but the toll gates and the tolls had improved the transport service. Interesting, when one of the stagecoaches crashed, the records show that it had the Belgian ambassador on board and his valet, and the Sardinian ambassador and his valet on board, and a surgeon from Gloucester. So they're the sort of people that travelled. Quite amazing who actually travelled around Britain in the 19th century.
So, did any rich and famous people stay at the Lion Hotel?
Charles Dickens, who used to stay here whilst he was writing the Pickwick Papers. He did a public reading at the music hall in Shrewsbury, and we believe he also did a public reading in our Adam Ballroom. Charles Darwin, who's another famous person who stayed at the hotel. He lived in Shrewsbury for the first 27 years of his life, and when he left on his epic voyage on the Beagle, he left from the hotel, from outside the front door, where there's a plaque in the pavement to say the point where he left from.
Now, one place that you could have seen the coaches as they hurtled from Shrewsbury all the way to London during the 19th century would have been on the top of that. I thought Lord Nelson's column was pretty high, but apparently it's not the tallest. It's claimed that this, Lord Hill's column, is the tallest Doric column in the world. But who exactly is Lord Hill? General Rowland Hill, the first Viscount Hill of Almaraz, fought in the Peninsular War as part of the wars against Napoleon back in the beginning of the 19th century. He also became Commander-in-Chief of the British Army in 1829. Well, seeing that he was born fairly near here and he was an MP for Shrewsbury, the powers that be thought it would be a great idea to commemorate his life with a massive great column. But oddly, it's not anywhere near the centre of town. Now the thing is, Shrewsbury is a fine oldie-woldy place with Elizabethan timber frame buildings and splendid examples of Georgian architecture lovingly preserved in the centre of town. There's a statue of Clive of India in the market square and one of Charles Darwin just outside the library building. So why was Lord Hill, I wonder, obviously a respected member of society, stuck beyond the limits of the river, past the Abbey and the Holy Cross, and shoved here at the end of Abbey Foregate? I can only assume that our travellers, making their tedious way to and from London, would look up at the great man and remind themselves that much fortitude was needed in taking to the British roads. He had been a fighter, and so might they need be, especially negotiating with a determined coachman. Now the great thing is, it's not solid, it's actually hollow, and you can go right up to the top. I've got the key. Now the only thing I should say is I'm a little scared of heights. So we'll see how we go. I tell you what, it's not an easy climb. It's makes you a little bit dizzy going round here. Thank goodness I've got this torch, otherwise I'd never see a thing. Wow! I have to say that you get an absolute stunning view from up here. It's just brilliant. That's the Wrekin. You've got Mary's spire on the church over there. Caer Caradoc that way. This is what exploring is all about. I love it up here. The column was designed by Edward Haycock and built between 1814 to 1816. He was responsible for a number of houses in Shropshire. He's brilliant. I love it up here. The views are unquestionably terrific. Every town should have its own column, in my humble opinion. Not only is it a fabulous landmark, but Lord Hill has become a bit of an old friend, giving reassurance as he overlooks the Shrewsbury suburbs, peering down on the London to Hollyhead road and taking in the old Abbey Church, the travelodge of medieval times. But generally the column's not open to the public, but if you ask them nicely at Shire Hall, they'll let you have the key. And I say, thank you, Lord Hill. He's up there, 17 foot high above me. From his lofty column, I wonder if Lord Hill would have been proud to watch the antics of one Sam Haywood.
He was a character. He drove the fastest stagecoach in the West. He really was an amazing character. He was born in Ellesmere in the early part of the 19th century, and for about 1820 to mid-1830s, Sam Haywood drove the stagecoach, and he was renowned. He was renowned for many things. One, his punctuality. He was never more than 10 minutes late ever in any of his journeys, and it is said that if the market clock showed a difference to Sam Hayward's arrival time, it was presumed the market clock was wrong, not Sam Hayward. And he was so insistent on getting the stagecoach on time that he wouldn't let anybody off. A solicitor once, a young solicitor, said at the bottom of Wild Cop, he was a bit worried how nervous and how fast he was going up the hill, said, could I get off now? Sam Hayward said, you be damned, and drove straight up Wild Cop. And this poor solicitor had a fright because Sam Hayward would draw in a big circle and come straight through the narrow entrance without stopping. And for somebody on top of the stagecoach to actually suddenly do full circle and come through this narrow gap, it was quite an interesting experience.
Unfortunately, it all came to an end with the advent of the steam train, and very quickly coach travel seemed just a bit too old-fashioned. Well, that was a long old way down, but travelling back in the past was not as easy as you might think, prone to many hazards, and that's what we're going to find out next. On a farm a few miles north of Shrewsbury and Lord Hill's Column, rural life continues as it has done for hundreds of years. It's hard to imagine that such an idyllic setting could have once been the breeding ground of a notorious rascal and ruffian. There is little left to belie the presence of the once legendary scoundrel, except this, an isolated stone ruin of Myddle Castle. Myddle is a quiet village in North Shropshire, with a 17th century church and a pub, the Red Lion, reported to be over 400 years old. The village grew up around the manor of Myddle back in the Middle Ages, and it's to that time, the beginning of the 14th century, we need to travel. This is all that's left of the old manor house that once stood here. It had permission to crenellate from the king and became Myddle Castle. The newly built fortified manor house was erected in 1308 and might have looked something like this. It was handed down over the years to various families, but ended up with a caretaker owner at the beginning of the 16th century. It was built as part of the protection against the Welsh. It even had a leek court. Life was good and wealth flourished. But then its keeper started to squander and gamble the money away. He allowed the estate to fall into rack and ruin. It's even claimed that he killed a man. But either way, eventually he was outlawed. Well, that's what tradition tells us, but who was this privileged person turned ruffian? Where was his cave? And what of his legend? Humphrey Kynaston was the second son of Sir John Kynaston, the then High Sheriff of Shropshire. He was born around 1468, but as the second son, he wasn't destined to inherit in the same way the first would, and so Humphrey was made constable of the then important castle here at Myddle. It was a responsible job, and repairs and the upkeep of the castle came out of his own money. Not too much is known about his earlier life, but we do know that it was Humphrey Kynaston that allowed the castle to fall into rack and ruin. It's hard to fully appreciate just how impressive the estate would have looked, there being so little left. But being wealthy back then came with important duties and spending on his office. But Humphrey had better things to do with his money. Lavish banquets, entertaining, gambling. No doubt he showered gifts on the ladies in his life. But soon he owed much, and even his friends and family refused to help him out. In those days, if you owed money, you were sent to prison until you settled your bills. But if you evaded both, you were outlawed. And as jail was not suitable for a fellow of noble birth, perhaps Kynaston thought it would be better to be on the run. Being outlawed meant exactly what it said. You were without the protection of the law. Your house and property was confiscated and reverted back to the state. You were a wanted man, and you were left to your own devices to survive as best you could. I'm next off to Nesscliffe, the haunt of a highwayman. These are the very woods, though perhaps not the actual trees, that wild Humphrey Kynaston, as he became known, once lived in. With the A5, or rather the old London to Hollyhead road running close by, there would have been easy pickings as merchants took their wares to and from Wales, or stewards acting for landlords carried their freshly collected rents. Hidden in what is now an old quarry, our noble turned highwayman lived his new life. And here is the cave that our rascal, ruffian and utter scoundrel took refuge in. We can no longer go into the cave as it's been blocked off, but there was a window and a solid oak door. But inside was two humble little cells carved out in the red sandstone rock. There we go. It's actually said that Humphrey would ride his trusty steed, Beelzebub, up these sandstone steps and vanish from sight in seconds. He evaded the authority many times that way, and that's no mean feat. They're quite steep, and this whole thing is quite a sheer face. But the cave there's two rooms inside. There's a small room and a large-ish room. Quite a humble dwelling for a highwayman of Humphrey's status. Incredibly, Myddle Castle was allowed to become ruinous, and over the years its remains have been captured in various sketchings, woodcuts and paintings. But it once had been magnificent. There was a moat that surrounded the whole castle. Somewhere here was a drawbridge and entrance tower, and the thick walls faced Wales in this direction. There was one, possibly two towers with stairs that led to the roof. This is one of the stairwells, which even recently collapsed. And it was in the 1970s that the final devastation took place. So, Joyce, tell me, you saw the castle collapse. Where were you?
Yes, I did. I was in the kitchen of the farmhouse, and it was a very calm, still December day. No wind, no nothing, very still. And I suddenly heard a rumbling, and I thought, oh, it's the children going round on their bikes. And I looked through the kitchen window, and I saw this big cloud of dust around the castle, and I thought, gosh, the castle's falling down. And this went on for several seconds, and then there was a horrible silence, and the dust sort of settled eventually, and I realised the castle was no more. You know, half of it had fallen off.
Gosh. Because your kids used to play in the castle,
well,
didn't
they did, yes, and I used to go up there because we kept hens in the orchard.
Was this an orchard then?
This was all garden at one time,
Right. Oh, okay.
And fruit trees as well, and then we had some hens, and this hen used to lay sort of 3 parts the way up the castle, made a nest. So,
oh, how brilliant! So you'd have to come in up and look
so
for
I
eggs.
went up the stairs, you know, up the and castle had actually fallen because the bottom of the stairs had given way that holds the whole of the staircase
Right.
up.
And it just came tumbling down.
And I think it just sort of gave way. It was a bit thin and, you know, not...
Was your was the hen up there at the top?
Oh no, this was some time later, thank goodness. My husband's father had it. They rented it in the 1890s, and then the estate it was on an estate, and the estate was sold about 1924, and the family bought it, and been here more or less ever since.
Humphrey may have left his castle, but what are these strange creatures that now seem to reside here?
They are in fact alpacas, the smaller cousin of the llama. And we've created our small herd here. We started with 4 females, 2 of which had the young, which are known as cria, last year. They are originally from the sort of mountain sides of Peru. They do quite like a hill, so they're quite happy here potting around the castle. They're actually used as guard animals for use in sort of free-range chickens or for lambing enterprises, because they're a very observant animal, as you can probably tell from them. They're always looking what's going on, and they've got a very high-pitched alarm call, so if any fox comes along, they kind of see them off in quite an obtrusive manner. They're wonderful, really. They're quite low maintenance. We feed them daily, and they like a bit of hay as well, and with their concentrate. But we trim their nails every few months, and just sort of normal worming that you do with any animal, really.
From alpacas to highwaymen, Myddle Castle has certainly seen its fair share of the unusual. But wild Humphrey Kynaston's legacy wasn't going to disappear that quickly. Legends soon started to build up about him, and no matter how the authorities tried to capture him, they failed at every stroke. Now this is Montford Bridge. It's the first civil engineering project that Thomas Telford got involved with when he came to Shropshire in the 18th century. But spin back to Kynaston's time, and all that was here was a series of stone piers with wooden planks running across. Now, the under-sheriff knew that Kynaston one day was in Shrewsbury, which is that way. He also knew he'd be coming back across Montford Bridge. So he ordered his men to remove the planks from the piers, thereby leaving a trap. But was Wild Humphrey in any way fazed when he came back to Montford Bridge? Not a bit of it. He saw the under-sheriff and his men hiding in the bushes. He merely waved, tapped his horse Beelzebub with his heels, and the horse leapt across the whole river in one go. An amazing feat, a feat of legends. And of course, there are many, many more stories like that. Thankfully, the days of the highwayman are over, but travel's never been easy. But at least these days, it's more convenient and comfortable. So maybe we shouldn't take it for granted quite so much as we do. Goodbye.